Good evening, everyone. This is Mary Murphy, and I am still in the Bronx. I'm trying to wait out a rainstorm. And so many of you have been writing to me, asking me if there would be a Facebook Live about the Junior case, that I decided to speak to you this evening and give you an update on what happened today. And there was a lot in court. Even though there was no big witness per se, a lot was talked about in court, starting with a debate this morning between the prosecutors and the defense attorneys. The defense attorneys say they want access to all these audio recordings that allegedly have their clients, the defendants in this murder case, talking about Junior's murder, and also where weapons might have been thrown out, discarded. And so there was this big debate because the defense attorneys say that their clients have not really been able to hear the recordings properly. They would like to be able to listen very closely, maybe have access to some of the phone numbers involved. So basically what happened was Morgan Dolan, the prosecutor, said there are in these calls admissions by the defendants and places where they discarded the weapons. So I'm kind of anticipating that these phone calls might be played near the end of the prosecution case. That's just a hunch on my part. The prosecutor has said that she is hoping to have the case wrapped up by the end of next week. What we heard in court today is that there's a big witness expected tomorrow, and then next week the medical examiner's office will probably have a witness on the stand talking about the autopsy, talking about the photos that showed and cataloged Junior's injuries after he was stabbed. And then my hunch, and it's just a hunch, is that at the end of the week, we might hear some of these phone recordings from jails around the city where the defendants who were picked up on murder one charges in Junior's killing may be heard talking about the case and making admissions, as the prosecutor said. So that's what happened this morning. And then some other crime scene unit detectives came on the stand, and actually one of them said that a knife was found in the pocket behind the passenger seat of one of the cars. I believe it was the gray Acura that Kevin Alvarez said that he was driving that night. Kevin Alvarez said that it was his mother's car, and he was the lead car in this 4-vehicle convoy that was chasing Junior for blocks until he ran into the bodega and tried to get shelter behind the counter. We also had testimony from some troopers with the Connecticut State Police. They picked up the final car that was allegedly involved in the chase, and that was weeks after the murder. That was the gray Honda, and he said he was on I-84, and he got some kind of a license plate hit that he heard about, so he was able to sort of box in this car that was owned by Luis Cabrera Santos. And so he talked about how they brought that car and that suspect into custody. So then we had a break for lunch, and I want to tell you about what happened this afternoon. Very, very, very interesting. We had a Sergeant Rafael Hernandez testify from the Paterson, New Jersey Police Department. My very first story on the Junior case was last June 24th, 2018, when I got a tip that in Paterson, New Jersey, 6 of the suspects in Junior's murder were found, and that they had been hiding out in some kind of gang stronghold, alleged Trinitarios hangout in Paterson at 260 East 24th Street. So Sergeant Hernandez said he had gotten the anonymous tip at his police department that some of the suspects could be found there. And he said he went with a bunch of other cops and one other sergeant at 1:46 p.m. on June 24th last year. This was 4 days after Lesandro Jr. Guzman-Feliz was killed on that bodega sidewalk in the Bronx. And he said that you could see through the windows on the first floor that there were people inside. So they walked right up to the first floor landing, and he said you could hear someone yelling, and then, quote, "Someone jumped out the first floor window. I could see the tattoo on his neck," the sergeant testified. He landed on the sidewalk in front of the house, and he ran to the rear of the house. It looked like he was running up to the second floor. Now, this suspect was later identified as Jose Tavarez, and I know that earlier in the case, it was testified to that he had a 157 tattoo on his neck, which means Trinitario in good standing. And this sergeant from Paterson said he later found Tavarez on the second floor changing his clothes. He said a total of 6 individuals were detained from that house in Paterson, New Jersey. And what the judge noted was that this sergeant ended up identifying 4 of the 5 murder defendants in court today as being at that house. The only one he didn't identify was Elvin Garcia. Now, there was already testimony earlier this week that Elvin Garcia allegedly went to his uncle's house in Philadelphia for 2 days, not that long after Junior was murdered. Elvin Garcia's girlfriend was actually on the stand, and as I mentioned earlier this week, she was very uncomfortable being in that role, but she testified that she and Elvin Garcia went to Philadelphia, and then when they came back to New York City on June 24th, police got in touch with Garcia and asked him to come into a Manhattan precinct, which he did, but then he was taken to the Bronx, and ultimately he was charged with murder in the first degree. Okay, so Elvin Garcia may not have been at that safe house, but the sergeant from Paterson identified 4 other defendants who were facing the murder 1 charges and said they were there. He said a total of 9 or 10 people were in that house. All right, after he testified, police officer Selba Perez from Paterson, New Jersey, got on the stand. And she said she also went to that house on June 24th. She had another story to tell because she said that she was going through the house. Basically, they were canvassing the house, and a lot of the cops were yelling, "Paterson Police, everyone, put your hands up, don't move." And she said when she got into the kitchen area, she noticed someone was hidden behind the refrigerator. She identified that someone as Antonio Rodriguez Hernandez Santiago. She said that he was shirtless, and here are her quotes. "He was hidden behind the refrigerator," she said. "He was physically behind the refrigerator where you could only see part of his arm hanging out." She said that he was shirtless. I mentioned that shortly a little while ago. She said she was able to remove him, that she recognized him from the photos that had been sent to Paterson by the NYPD wanted flyers, and one of those photos was of this guy Antonio, and she said that he really didn't resist, and she brought him out. So they got a total of 6 suspects in Paterson, New Jersey on June 24th. Elvin Garcia apparently was brought to the Bronx by a different method, and those first 6 suspects actually didn't come back to New York to be arraigned till about June 27th, a few days later. It took a while for them to be arraigned in New Jersey and then brought here to the Bronx, where the rain seems to be stopping a little bit after some downpours this evening. So it was a very busy day in court, and of course one very, very sobering and compelling part of the day was in the middle of the day, and that's when an officer from the 48th precinct testified about being called over to the hospital when, Junior was essentially bleeding to death on the sidewalk. He said he saw the teenager with all these hysterical people around him outside the emergency room near the security booth, and then he actually was told, "You need to go to the bodega because that's where this incident happened." So he said he went back to the bodega, quickly saw some of the surveillance footage of what had happened, spoke to the owner, but then he said that he was told by a supervisor to go back to the hospital. And the reason he had to go back to the hospital was to voucher the clothing that Junior was wearing when he died. And he had been pronounced dead at the hospital shortly before this police officer got back there. He said he saw the teenager, the 15-year-old, on the stretcher, and that a sheet was covering him all the way up to his neck. And then it was his role to take the clothing that Junior was wearing and to voucher it for evidence. So there was a blood-soaked white t-shirt. There was also a blood-soaked sweatshirt. And you remember that from the video, how it looked before this all happened. It was a very stylish sweatshirt. It was blue and white, and there were white stars on the sleeves, and that was the sweatshirt that Junior was wearing. Both the sweatshirt and the t-shirt were blood-soaked. They had been torn or ripped, probably by emergency room personnel trying to save Junior's life. His navy boxer shorts, they didn't seem as bloodied. and also his navy and gray regular shorts that he wore over his boxers. They were vouchered, and then there was one white sock that was full of blood. The other sock was not vouchered. And we know that Junior had run out of his sandals when he was being pursued, and his sandals, his black Nike sandals, had been found on the street. So this officer testified that the clothes were so bloodied that the blood leaked through the bag, the brown bag they used to voucher the evidence. So he had to re-voucher everything more than a day later. You know, Junior died around midnight on June 20th, and this officer responded in the early hours of June 21st to retrieve the clothing as evidence. And then the next day, June 22nd, he had to re-voucher everything in new bags because of what had happened with the blood leaking through. Junior's father, Lesandro Guzman, was in court today. He was there for the testimony and saw his son's bloody clothing, the ripped clothing. He stayed calm for the most part during that testimony, but then he seemed to get agitated when there was cross-examination of another witness about a knife that was found, I believe the knife that was found in the car. And he left rather abruptly, and the police officers that escort him into court and the court officers took him out, and he went into a car and left the courthouse for the day. And as I've mentioned in some of the stories I've written for Pix11.com, Junior's mother, Lesandro, has not been in court since last Thursday, a week ago, and that was the day she had what she called a nervous breakdown because she saw footage she had never seen before of her son, terrified, hiding under a sink behind the counter in the back of the bodega, and there was a locked partition that was sort of keeping the gang members at bay. And she got so upset when she realized that that door was open and it gave Kevin Alvarez access to her son. And of course we know what happened next. He was dragged out to the sidewalk where he was stabbed. So a very busy day in court, as I mentioned. As you know, no cameras allowed inside the courtroom. We have done our best over the last 4 weeks to bring you the testimony as comprehensively as we can. We do know that an important witness will be on the stand tomorrow, and we believe the medical examiner's people will be on sometime early next week or the middle of the week. And then finally, we expect recordings of prison phone calls to be played before the prosecutor wraps her case. We're not clear as to what the defense will do if it gets a chance to present its own case. What the lawyers have done so far on the defense team have been to rigorously cross-examine all the witnesses that the prosecution has put on the stand. So once again, a very busy day, a rainy day in the Bronx. We will be back tomorrow in court, and I see a lot of you are writing to me, sending prayers to Junior's mother and family. Someone is complimenting the job that we've done at Pix11, and we really appreciate that. Another person said she'll never get these images out of her mind. Someone's asking me if the testimony tomorrow is Sosa. You know, I have been asked, not to talk specifically about who will be getting on the stand on a given day because we really don't know. The prosecution has had to rearrange schedules throughout this trial, so I don't really want to say who's coming on the stand, but we know that at least one important witness is left, maybe two, people that are very crucial to the case. So we'll have to stand by and see who is on tomorrow. Tomorrow is Friday, and then next week is supposed to be the last week of the prosecution's case. There have been delays in this trial, so nothing is a guarantee. But all the defendants were back in court today. You may remember on Tuesday, two of them didn't come. They voluntarily excluded themselves. Muniz and Rodriguez, Hernandez, Santiago did not come on Tuesday, but they were back today, all dressed up for court, and there was really no outburst or anything like that. I know Janike, he spoke in Spanish to the judge, and of course there's a translator there, and he was upset about getting access to the best material possible relating to the phone calls that were allegedly made from prison. Those will be very interesting to hear once they're put into evidence. There is debate about how much should be put into evidence, how much access the defense can have to the audio recordings so that their clients can hear them. So we'll know more tomorrow. There's supposed to be another hearing before court even starts, a closed-door hearing with the judge and the defense attorneys and the prosecutors. So as soon as we get information, we bring it to you. We've been coming to you on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter. Pix11.com is our webpage. And of course, broadcast. You can expect some live broadcast reports tomorrow about the witness that comes on the stand. And I'm just looking at any more posts that you have. A lot of people just saying justice for Junior and thanking us for continuing to do our coverage. I hope I've given you a good sense of what happened in court today. And tomorrow, please look for me at court. I'll be back again. And thank you again, and have a good evening.